A dog's desperate scratching exposed a secret buried for 40 years, and powerful men would do anything to keep it hidden. A homeless Navy SEAL inherited a $50 log cabin sealed for decades. His dog found what they hid inside. Deep in Wyoming's frozen mountains, Ethan Cross thought he was inheriting nothing more than a forgotten cabin nobody wanted. But when his loyal canine, Shadow, began clawing at a wall the moment they arrived, he uncovered the first clue to a mystery buried beneath decades of silence. What they found would expose hidden truths, test their courage, and change the lives of countless veterans forever. Comment 1 if you'd follow your dog's instincts, or 0 if you'd walk away. And tell us where you're watching from. At 4:37 a.m., the temperature outside Red Creek, Wyoming, sat at 8 degrees above zero. The old Ford F-150 groaned whenever the wind pushed against it. Cold found its way through every crack in the aging truck. Frost crept across the inside corners of the windshield. The heater had stopped working almost 2 winters ago. Now survival depended on blankets, layers, and stubbornness. Ethan Cross woke before the alarm. He always did. Some habits followed a man home from war and refused to leave. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The darkness pressed against the windows. The sound of the wind became rotor blades. The shaking truck became a military transport. His breathing shortened. His hand shot toward the flashlight, resting beside the steering wheel. Then a warm weight pressed against his knee. Solid, familiar, real Shadow. The German Shepherd lifted his head from the passenger seat and stared directly into Ethan's eyes. Not moving. Not barking, just watching, grounding him. Ethan let out a slow breath. The panic passed. Montana, no Wyoming. Red Creek, January. Not the Persian Gulf, not the mountains of Afghanistan, not anymore. Morning, buddy, Ethan whispered. Shadow's ears twitched. The dog stretched carefully before settling again. The movement revealed old scars hidden beneath thick fur. One crossed his shoulder. Another disappeared beneath his chest. Both reminders of explosions neither of them had truly left behind. Outside, the parking lot of the closed feed store sat empty, except for a snow-covered tractor and an abandoned horse trailer near the road. Ethan rubbed his hands together. His fingers hurt from the cold. The dashboard clock glowed 4:38. He checked his wallet. $23. That was everything. $23 and a half tank of gas. He looked at the sleeping dog. Then at the protein bar sitting on the dashboard. Breakfast, he broke it in half. Shadow got the larger piece, as usual. The dog accepted it gently, never rushed, never begged, professional to the end. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. The phone rang. The sound startled him. Few people called anymore. Most had stopped years ago. His ex-wife stopped first. Friends came later. Eventually silence took over. The screen displayed an unknown number. He considered ignoring it. Shadow lifted his head. The second ring echoed through the cab. Ethan answered. Yeah, a woman's voice spoke calmly. Mr. Ethan Cross? Depends who's asking. My name is Rebecca Turner. I'm calling from Turner Probate Services. Ethan frowned. Probate? That usually meant death. I think you've got the wrong guy. I don't believe I do. Outside, dawn had not yet arrived. Snow drifted sideways beneath the streetlights. Rebecca continued. A relative of yours passed away approximately 3 weeks ago. Ethan rubbed his jaw. What relative? A Mr. Samuel Cross. The name meant almost nothing. A distant uncle, maybe. Someone he'd met once at a funeral when he was young. Someone who lived somewhere in northern Wyoming. He barely remembered the man's face. What about him? You've been named sole beneficiary of his remaining property. Ethan laughed once. A dry sound. Not because anything was funny. Because life sometimes ran out of new ways to surprise a man. What property? Papers shuffled on the other end. A log cabin and surrounding acreage in the Bighorn Mountains. Silence. Ethan waited. Rebecca continued. The property appraisal lists its current value at $50. More silence. Even Shadow stopped chewing. Ethan looked down at the dog, then out at the frozen parking lot, then back at the windshield. A $50 cabin? That's correct. He laughed again. This time louder. The sound filled the truck. 3 months ago, he'd been sleeping near a bus station. 2 months ago, he'd been chased from a campground. Now someone was leaving him a cabin worth less than a used lawnmower. Life had a sense of humor. I suppose there's a catch. No catch. Debt? No. Taxes? Minimal. Then why's it worth $50? A pause. Long enough to feel strange. Finally, Rebecca answered. The cabin has been abandoned for decades. How many decades? Approximately 34 years. That got his attention. Nobody's lived there? Not officially. The wording felt odd. Not officially. Ethan looked at Shadow. The dog was watching him, listening, always listening. Rebecca continued, Mr. Cross, there are legal documents requiring your signature. I'd strongly recommend reviewing them. Ethan checked the fuel gauge. Half a tank. Enough. Maybe. Where? My office is in Sheridan. He knew the town, 2 hours north. Maybe less if the roads cooperated. What time? 10 o'clock. Ethan stared through the frosted windshield. A cabin. A roof. Walls not much. But more than he had now. I'll be there. The line disconnected. For a long moment, neither Ethan nor Shadow moved. Wind rattled the truck. Snow drifted across the parking lot. Finally, Ethan looked at the dog. What do you think? Shadow blinked. The answer was obvious. Anywhere was better than sleeping in a truck. By 9:53 a.m., Ethan parked outside a small brick office building in Sheridan. The truck looked rough in daylight. Rust around the wheel wells, peeling paint, a cracked side mirror held together with tape, the kind of vehicle people glanced at and immediately forgot. Shadow jumped down carefully. His paws landed in fresh snow, instantly alert, scanning, watching, working. The law office felt too warm, too clean. Leather chairs, fresh coffee, soft music. The receptionist glanced nervously at Shadow. Sir, dogs aren't usually allowed. Retired military K9. That changed everything. It usually did. Within minutes, Ethan sat across from Rebecca Turner. She was in her early 60s, gray hair, sharp eyes. The kind of woman who noticed details. She slid a folder across the desk. Samuel Cross updated his will 7 years ago. Ethan opened the folder. Property maps, transfer forms, tax records. Then the appraisal, $50. Actually printed on official paperwork. He almost laughed again. Rebecca removed a brass key from a drawer, old, worn smooth. This belonged to the cabin. The key landed softly on the desk. Ethan picked it up. Cold metal, heavy, older than he expected. Why me? Rebecca folded her hands. Samuel was very specific. About what? You, Ethan frowned. That doesn't make sense. Rebecca opened another file. He followed your military career. Ethan looked up. What? He subscribed to newsletters. You're kidding. I'm not. That felt impossible. Nobody followed his life. Most people forgot him years ago, Rebecca continued. He knew about your deployments. Ethan stayed silent. He knew about your dog. Shadow lifted his head at that. Rebecca smiled slightly. He mentioned him often. The room suddenly felt quieter. Why? I asked the same question. What did he say? Rebecca hesitated, then answered softly. He said a man who refuses to abandon his dog will probably refuse to abandon people. The words landed harder than Ethan expected. Something tightened behind his ribs. For a second, he couldn't speak. Rebecca slid one final envelope across the desk. His name was written on the front, in shaky handwriting, Ethan Cross. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message contained only one sentence. If the dog refuses to leave, stay and listen. Ethan read it twice. Then a third time. A strange feeling settled over him. Not fear, not hope, something in between. By noon, the cabin belonged to him, or close enough. The drive into the Bighorn Mountains took nearly 3 hours. Snow covered everything. Frozen creeks, fence posts, pine forests stretching for miles. The world grew quieter the farther they climbed. Cell service vanished. Traffic disappeared. Eventually, only mountains remained. Shadow sat upright the entire trip, watching, waiting. Around 3:17 p.m., Ethan turned onto an unmarked logging road. The truck bounced over packed snow. Branches scraped against the doors. The forest closed around them. Then the cabin appeared. Not suddenly, slowly, like it had been hiding among the trees. Ethan stopped the truck. Neither he nor Shadow moved. The cabin overlooked a frozen lake, gray water trapped beneath ice, snowdrifts piled against the walls. A stone chimney leaned slightly west. The porch sagged. One shutter hung crooked. The place looked forgotten. 30 years forgotten. Well, Ethan muttered. There you are. The engine died. Silence arrived instantly. Mountain silence, deep enough to hear your own heartbeat. Shadow jumped from the truck first. The dog landed in the snow, then froze. Ethan expected him to head toward the front door. Instead, Shadow turned sharply left. Toward the side of the cabin, he began walking quickly, purposefully, not exploring, heading somewhere. Ethan followed. The dog reached the western wall, then stopped. His ears rose. His nose pressed against the weathered logs. He sniffed once, twice, then started scratching. Hard. Wood chips scattered into the snow. Shadow, the dog ignored him. More scratching, more digging. Ethan frowned. What is it? Shadow moved lower, toward the stone foundation. Now he was pawing at the snow itself, digging. Relentless, focused. The same way he'd once searched for explosives. The same way he'd once located wounded soldiers. Ethan's stomach tightened. Because Shadow never behaved like this without reason. Snow flew behind the dog. A few inches became several. Then the paw struck something solid, metal, a faint clink. Shadow barked once, sharp, urgent. Ethan dropped to one knee. His fingers brushed away the remaining snow. A loose foundation stone shifted. He pulled it aside. Something rusted sat beneath, metal, small, covered in dirt. Ethan picked it up. Dog tags. Old military dog tags. His pulse slowed, then quickened again. He wiped away decades of grime. A name appeared. The metal trembled slightly in his hand. Not from the cold, from recognition. Because he knew exactly what he was holding. A Navy identification tag. And the name stamped across it belonged to a Navy diver officially declared dead in 1987. For several seconds, and Ethan Cross simply stared at the metal resting in his gloved hand. The wind moved across the frozen lake behind him. Snow drifted through the pine trees. Shadow stood beside the foundation wall, watching him, waiting. The dog seemed strangely calm now that the tag had been found. As if discovering it had been his mission all along. Ethan turned the tag over. The rust had eaten away portions of the surface, but enough remained visible. Name. Service number. U.S. Navy. The details were unmistakable. A man named Daniel Mercer, officially dead, officially buried. At least according to the records Ethan vaguely remembered reading years ago. What were you doing under this cabin? Ethan muttered. The mountains offered no answer. Shadow nudged Ethan's elbow. The movement broke the spell. The cold immediately returned to his awareness. His fingers ached. The wind bit through his coat, and daylight was already fading. He looked toward the cabin again. The place seemed different now. Darker somehow. Less abandoned, more secretive. The windows reflected the gray sky. The chimney leaned silently over the frozen shoreline. The whole structure looked like it had been holding its breath for decades. Ethan slipped the tag into his jacket pocket. Let's get inside. Shadow followed, but not willingly. The shepherd paused near the porch. His ears rotated, listening, scanning. The same way he used to before entering compounds overseas. That alone made Ethan uneasy. Shadow trusted very little, but he trusted buildings even less, especially buildings that felt wrong. The porch groaned beneath Ethan's boots. Every board complained. Snow had collected in the corners. The front door carried years of weather damage. Its paint had long ago peeled away. The brass key Rebecca Turner gave him felt strangely heavy. Ethan inserted it into the lock. The mechanism resisted, then clicked. The sound echoed louder than it should have. The door swung inward. Darkness waited beyond. Cold air sipped out. Old air, the smell hit first. Dust, wood smoke, mildew, age, the scent of a place forgotten by time. Ethan clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall. A worn leather chair sat near a window. Bookshelves leaned under the weight of old books. Dust covered everything, but not evenly. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. Certain areas carried less dust than others. Small patches, subtle, easy to miss, yet impossible to ignore once seen. Someone had touched things, not recently, but not decades ago either. His pulse slowed, then quickened again. Shadow entered. Immediately, the dog stopped, not near Ethan, not near the door. His attention locked onto the fireplace, the exact center of the cabin. He stared, unblinking, rigid. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. The stone hearth looked ordinary enough, weathered, cold, unused. Yet Shadow refused to look anywhere else. "You seeing something?" The shepherd's ears twitched. No answer. Just continued focus. A familiar knot tightened in Ethan's stomach. He knew that look. Shadow had worn it before. Before explosions, before ambushes, before danger. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. The silence felt heavier. Outside, daylight faded completely. By 5:30, darkness had swallowed the lake. The world beyond the windows disappeared. Only black glass remained. Ethan managed to get a small fire started. The chimney protested, then finally accepted the smoke. Warmth slowly spread through the room. The orange glow transformed the cabin. The shadows moved differently now, longer, more alive. The firelight revealed photographs hanging above the mantel. Old photographs, mostly black and white. Fishing trips, mountain views, hunting camps. One picture caught Ethan's attention. A younger Samuel Cross stood beside a German shepherd. Not Shadow, a different dog, but remarkably similar. The same alert eyes, the same military posture. The photo had been taken outside the cabin. The year printed in one corner. Ethan stared at it. Samuel looked happy. Not rich, not successful, just peaceful. The kind of peace Ethan hadn't felt in years. Shadow finally moved. He approached the fireplace, then lowered himself directly in front of it. Not beside it, not near it, directly in front, guarding it, watching it. Ethan noticed immediately. Shadow never chose positions randomly. Never, not after deployment. Every location meant something. Every angle mattered. The dog seemed to be protecting the fireplace, or monitoring it. Neither explanation helped. By 7 o'clock, snow began falling again. Heavy snow. The kind that buried roads overnight. The kind that isolated people. Ethan heated a can of soup over the fire. Half for him, half for Shadow. The meal was simple, but warmer than anything they'd eaten in days. Outside, wind pushed against the walls. The old cabin creaked constantly. Wood expanded. Wood contracted. Old structures made noises. He knew that, still. Something about these sounds felt different. At 8:17 p.m., the first metallic knock came. Clang. Ethan froze. The spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Shadow's head snapped upward instantly. The dog was on his feet before the echo faded. Silence returned. Then another sound, fainter, below them, somewhere beneath the floor. Clang, metal against wood. Ethan slowly lowered the spoon. The fire crackled softly behind him. Shadow moved closer to the hearth. The dog's muscles tightened. His tail stiffened. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Then nothing, only silence. Several minutes passed. Ethan eventually convinced himself it was settling lumber. Old pipes. Something natural. It had to be. Yet when he tried eating again, he found he'd lost his appetite. The feeling persisted. The feeling of being watched, not by a person, by a secret. Around midnight, exhaustion finally caught him. He spread blankets near the fire. Shadow refused every invitation to sleep elsewhere. Instead, the dog remained near the fireplace, watching, waiting. The last thing Ethan saw before closing his eyes was Shadow staring into the flames, still focused, still listening. Then sleep arrived, not peaceful sleep, never peaceful. The dream began in darkness, a helicopter, rotor blades, radio chatter, a desert road, heat, smoke, the smell of burning fuel, someone shouting coordinates, someone screaming for help. Then an explosion. The memory slammed into him, violent, immediate. His body reacted before his mind could. Ethan woke with a gasp, his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. His breathing shallow, his heart hammering. The fire had almost died. Only red embers remained. The cabin sat in darkness. For one terrible second, he didn't know where he was. Then Shadow appeared. The shepherd pressed against him, solid, real, grounding him. The panic slowly faded. Ethan rubbed his face. The clock on his phone read 2:41 a.m. Outside, snow hammered the windows. Inside, the cabin felt colder. Then came the sound again. Clang, this time louder. Not a dream, not imagination. Metal, somewhere below the floor. Shadow surged upright. The dog growled. Low, deep, dangerous. Every hair along his back stood up. Ethan grabbed the flashlight. The beam swept across the room. Nothing. The kitchen, empty. The shelves, still. The doorway, clear. Then the sound returned. Clang. Directly beneath them, Shadow barked once. Sharp, urgent. The same bark he used when locating something important. Ethan moved toward the fireplace. The beam crossed the stone hearth, the rug, the floorboards. Everything appeared normal, yet Shadow continued growling. His eyes locked downward, toward the stones, toward the foundation beneath the fireplace. Ethan crouched, ran his fingers across the floor. The wood felt different here. Smoother, less worn, as if repairs had once been made. His pulse quickened. The flashlight revealed faint scrape marks near the edge of the hearth. Old marks, but deliberate, not natural. Someone had moved something here. Once, long ago, or maybe not so long ago. The realization settled heavily over him. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire flickered weakly. And for the first time since inheriting the cabin, Ethan began to suspect that Samuel Cross hadn't left him a forgotten building. He had left him a mystery. Shadow suddenly stepped forward. His growl deepened. Then the dog placed one paw directly on the stone hearth and refused to move it. The cabin fell silent, except for the wind, except for the fire, except for the strange metallic sound that echoed once more from somewhere beneath the floor. And Shadow began staring at the stone fireplace, as if something underneath was trying to get out. The storm raged outside until dawn. Snow hammered the cabin roof. Wind pushed against the walls, hard enough to make the old logs groan. But neither Ethan nor Shadow slept much after that. Every time Ethan drifted off, another metallic knock seemed to rise from somewhere beneath the hearth. Not loud, not violent, just enough to remind him it was there, waiting. By 6:18 a.m., pale winter light filtered through the frost-covered windows. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Shadow still sat in exactly the same place, facing the fireplace, watching, guarding. The dog had not moved more than a few feet all night. That alone convinced Ethan something wasn't right. Military dogs didn't obsess over nothing, especially not Shadow. The shepherd had spent years detecting explosives, hidden compartments, buried weapons, and trapped entrances. His instincts had saved lives, more than once. Ethan rubbed his tired eyes. "All right, buddy." Shadow's ears immediately perked. "You've got my attention." The dog stood. His tail remained still. No excitement, no playfulness, pure focus. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and approached the hearth. Up close, the stonework looked older than the rest of the cabin. The fireplace had likely been built decades before some of the walls. The stones were large river rocks, carefully fitted together, strong, permanent. At least that was the intention. Something else caught his attention. A faded rug lay directly in front of the hearth. Its edges were worn smooth, but one corner looked different, recently disturbed. Not yesterday, not last week, but sometime within the past few years, someone had moved it. Ethan crouched, pulled the rug aside. Dust scattered across the floor. Beneath it sat a square metal grate hidden between the floorboards. He stared. Shadow immediately stepped closer. The dog's nose touched the grate. Then he looked at Ethan. That look again. The same look he'd given before finding the Navy tag outside. The same look that said, "Here, this is it." Ethan grabbed the fireplace poker. The metal was cold against his hands. He wedged it beneath the edge of the grate. Pushed nothing. The grate resisted. Years of rust held it in place. He pushed harder. The poker slipped. A loud metallic crack echoed through the cabin. Shadow jumped backward, then instantly returned. The grate shifted. Only slightly, but enough. Ethan adjusted his grip, applied more pressure. This time, the metal cover broke free completely. A rush of stale air escaped from below. Cold, earthy, ancient. The smell reminded Ethan of underground bunkers he'd entered overseas. Places sealed for years. Forgotten places. Hidden places. His pulse quickened. Shadow lowered his head toward the opening, sniffed, then stepped back, not alarmed, interested. Ethan aimed the flashlight downward. A narrow shaft disappeared beneath the cabin, about 4 feet deep, reinforced with old timber. At the bottom sat something rectangular, metal, dark green, military green. His breath caught. An army-style footlocker. The kind used for storing equipment. The kind designed to survive decades. What the hell? The words escaped before he could stop them. The locker looked untouched. Dust covered every surface. Cobwebs stretched across the corners. Yet somehow it felt deliberate, like somebody wanted it found. Eventually, just not too soon. Ethan lowered himself onto one knee, reached into the shaft. The handle was ice-cold, heavy, much heavier than he expected. He pulled. The box refused to move. Shadow watched every second. Ethan braced both feet. Pulled again. The locker scraped across packed earth. Dust exploded upward. His shoulders burned. The old injuries complained immediately. Years of service had left permanent reminders. A damaged knee. A shoulder that never fully healed. But eventually the locker slid close enough. One final pull. Then it emerged from the shaft, resting on the cabin floor. The metal echoed softly against the boards. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared. The box looked military, not identical, but close. One corner carried faded lettering nearly erased by time. He wiped away grime with his sleeve. Letters slowly emerged. S. Cross, Samuel, his relative. Dead man had hidden this beneath the fireplace for decades. Shadow stepped forward. His nose traced the edges. No fear, no warning, just curiosity. Ethan slowly opened the latches. One, then the other. The metal clicked loudly. The sound seemed to fill the entire cabin. For a moment he hesitated. The strange feeling returned. The feeling that somebody was watching. Not physically, but through time, like Samuel was standing nearby, waiting to see what happened next. Finally, Ethan lifted the lid. The locker opened, and his world changed. Inside sat neatly organized bundles, protected by wax paper, wrapped in oilcloth, stored with military precision. The first thing he noticed was a leather collar, dark brown, cracked with age. A brass plate remained attached. Ethan picked it up carefully. The inscription was still visible. Patriot Military Working Dog. His eyes narrowed. Patriot. The same dog from the photograph above the fireplace. The same dog standing beside Samuel Cross in 1988. Shadow sniffed the collar, then sat quietly, almost respectfully, as if recognizing another working dog, another veteran. Ethan swallowed hard, then reached deeper into the locker. Photographs, dozens of them, black and white images, old color prints, military camps, mountain cabins, German shepherds beside uniformed men, some smiling, some not. One photograph stopped him cold. A younger Samuel Cross stood outside this very cabin. Beside him sat Patriot. Behind them stood 3 other veterans, one missing an arm, another using crutches. The final man looked no older than 25, all of them smiling, all of them alive. On the back, somebody had written, "Home again, winter 1988. Ethan stared at the words, "Home again." The phrase lingered. Something about it felt important. He continued searching. Maps came next. Folded topographic maps, marked with red circles, mountain trails, forest roads, coordinates, notes written in the margins. Some had faded. Others remained clear. Then he found journals, 6 of them, weathered notebooks tied together with cord. The first pages belonged to Samuel. The handwriting was rough, military, practical. The first entry dated back more than 30 years. Ethan opened one at random. The cabin stays quiet. That's what they need most. Not therapy, not speeches. Quiet. He turned another page. Patriot slept through the night for the first time since returning home. I think the mountain helps. Another page. 2 more handlers arrived this week. Neither talks much. That's fine. Dogs don't care about words. Ethan stopped reading. The fire crackled behind him. Outside, snow drifted across the frozen lake. Inside, the cabin suddenly felt different, less abandoned, more alive. These weren't survival journals. They were records. Records of people healing, veterans, handlers' dogs, a refuge, a sanctuary, hidden in the mountains, long before anyone knew it existed. Shadow rested beside him, his head lowered onto Ethan's leg. The simple contact grounded him. Ethan opened another journal, then another. The pattern became clear. Dozens of names, dozens of stories, veterans struggling after war, retired military dogs, handlers unable to move forward, people who came to the cabin, stayed a while, then left stronger. The realization settled over him slowly. Samuel hadn't hidden treasure. He had hidden a mission, a purpose, a legacy. Then Ethan discovered something else. A folded sheet tucked into the final journal. Unlike the others, this page wasn't yellow with age. It looked newer. His heart quickened. The message contained only one sentence, written in bold handwriting. If they ever find this place, don't trust anyone who asks about the ridge. Ethan read it twice, then a third time. The cabin suddenly felt colder. The fire seemed smaller. Shadow's head lifted immediately. The dog stared toward the window, not the fireplace, the window. Ethan followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Only falling snow, then movement, a shadow passing between the trees, gone almost instantly. His pulse spiked. He rose to his feet, crossed toward the glass, looked outside. Nothing. Only forest, only snow, only silence. But somewhere beyond the frozen shoreline, hidden among the pines, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that somebody else knew exactly what had just been found, and that they were already watching. The shadow vanished before he could get a better look. 1 second it was there. The next, only snow drifted through the trees. Ethan stood motionless beside the window. The flashlight remained in his hand. Behind him, the journals lay open across the floor. The photographs, the maps, Patriot's old collar, decades of hidden history, all suddenly felt exposed. Shadow moved to Ethan's side. The German shepherd stared into the forest, not barking, not growling, watching, the same way he used to watch distant ridgelines overseas. Looking for movement, looking for danger. The cabin felt smaller now, as if the walls could no longer keep secrets. Eventually, darkness settled completely across the mountains. The frozen lake loch disappeared beneath the night. Only the snow remained visible beneath the moonlight. Ethan secured the front door, checked every window, then checked them again. Old habits. The same habits that made sleep difficult, the same habits that kept people alive. By midnight, the forest remained quiet. No footsteps, no vehicles, nothing. Yet the feeling persisted. Someone had been there. Someone had been close enough to watch. Shadow refused to leave the front room. The dog slept lightly beside the fireplace, one eye opening at every sound. Ethan finally drifted off near 2 in the morning. His dreams came quickly. Cold water, dark waves, a military vessel pitching through a storm, men shouting over the wind. Then another memory crashed into it. A desert road, gunfire, dust, a teammate screaming his name. Ethan woke with a violent gasp. His heart hammered against his ribs. The fire had nearly burned out. The room glowed faint orange. Shadow immediately lifted his head. The dog crossed the room and pressed his shoulder against Ethan's leg, grounding him, anchoring him. The panic slowly faded. Outside, dawn was beginning to brighten the horizon. The mountains emerged from darkness, one ridge at a time. For a moment, everything felt peaceful again. Then Shadow growled. Low, deep, warning. Ethan followed the dog's gaze toward the driveway. A vehicle was approaching. The engine echoed faintly through the trees. Not a truck, not a local ranch vehicle. Something larger, newer, more expensive. Snow crunched beneath tires. A black SUV emerged from the forest road. The vehicle looked completely out of place. Shiny paint, dark windows, luxury wheels. The kind of vehicle usually seen outside corporate offices. Not mountain cabins. Not forgotten wilderness roads. The SUV rolled to a stop beside Ethan's pickup. The engine remained running. For several seconds, nobody exited. Shadow stepped between Ethan and the front door. Every muscle tightened. The driver's door finally opened. A tall man stepped into the snow. Mid-50s, expensive coat, expensive boots, perfect haircut. The kind of man who looked comfortable everywhere, even where he clearly didn't belong. He smiled. The smile never reached his eyes. Morning. Ethan didn't answer. The man glanced toward Shadow. That's quite a dog. Shadow responded with a low growl. The man's smile faded slightly. My name is Derek Holloway. The name meant nothing, at least not yet. Derek Holloway Development Group. Still nothing. The man climbed the porch steps slowly, careful, confident, as though he expected to be welcomed. He extended a hand. Ethan ignored it. The hand slowly returned to his pocket. Samuel Cross passed away recently. Ethan nodded once. You knew him? We spoke a few times over the years. The answer felt rehearsed, too smooth, too ready. Holloway glanced past Ethan into the cabin. His eyes moved quickly. Fireplace, windows, floor, everything inventory. Assessment. The look lasted less than a second. Ethan noticed anyway. Military training had taught him to recognize people who scanned rooms, people who evaluated spaces, people who searched for things. What do you want? Ethan asked. Holloway looked back toward him. Straight to business. Interesting. I understand you inherited this property. Maybe. I'd like to buy it. The answer came too quickly, too directly. No conversation, no small talk, just business. Ethan leaned against the porch railing. You drove all the way up here for that? I did. Why? Holloway smiled again. The land has potential. The answer sounded hollow. The property looked barely habitable. The cabin was falling apart. The road disappeared every winter. The nearest town sat miles away. Potential wasn't the reason. Ethan could feel it. Shadow growled again. Louder this time. Holloway glanced at the dog. I don't think he likes me. He's usually a good judge of character. That smile disappeared entirely. Only for a moment, then it returned. Polished, professional. I'll make this simple. Holloway reached into his coat, removed a folder. Inside sat paperwork. Prepared paperwork. Already signed, already completed except for Ethan's name. That alone set off alarms. Holloway handed him a sheet. The number sat near the bottom. Ethan stared. $100,000. Cash offer. His eyes narrowed. The cabin had been appraised at 50, not 50,000. 50. $100,000 made no sense. Not unless something else existed. Something valuable. Something hidden. The journals, the maps, the warning. Don't trust anyone who asks about the ridge. Samuel's words suddenly echoed in Ethan's head. Holloway watched him carefully, trying to read his reaction, trying to measure what he knew. Ethan gave him nothing. That's a lot of money. It is, for a cabin worth $50. The man's smile tightened. Market conditions change. No kidding. Silence settled between them. Wind pushed through the pines. Snow drifted across the lake. Shadow never stopped staring at Holloway. Finally, Ethan handed back the paperwork. No. Holloway blinked, as though the answer surprised him. Most people would have accepted immediately. Most people weren't Ethan. Perhaps you should think about it. I already did. You haven't heard my best offer. Don't need to. The man's jaw tightened slightly. The first genuine emotion Ethan had seen. Frustration. Interesting. Holloway glanced toward the cabin again. Toward the fireplace. Toward the windows. Toward the roof line. Looking, searching. Then he looked back. If you change your mind, call me. He handed over a business card. Ethan accepted it. More out of curiosity than politeness. The card felt expensive. Everything about the man felt expensive. Everything except his reason for being there. That remained hidden. Holloway started back toward the SUV, then paused. One final question. Have you found anything unusual inside the cabin? The words hung in the air. There it was. The real reason. Not the land. Not the cabin. Something else. Something he believed was hidden there. Ethan shrugged. Just mice. For the first time, Shadow barked. Sharp, sudden, aggressive. Holloway actually stepped backward. Only slightly, but enough. The dog never took his eyes off him. Neither did Ethan. After several uncomfortable seconds, Holloway climbed into the SUV. The engine started. The vehicle turned around. Snow sprayed behind the tires. Then it disappeared into the trees. Gone. But not forgotten. Shadow continued staring long after the vehicle vanished. Ethan watched the road, thinking, calculating. $100,000. For a $50 cabin. The math didn't work. Not even close. Eventually, he returned inside. The warmth of the fire greeted him. The journals waited where he left them. So did the maps and Samuel's warning. Ethan unfolded one of the maps again. The red markings suddenly seemed more important, more urgent. His eyes followed a trail leading north of the cabin, toward a ridgeline overlooking the lake. One note had been written beside it, small handwriting, almost hidden. Observation point. Another mark sat deeper in the wilderness. No label, only a circle and a question mark. Shadow approached. The dog lowered his nose to the map, then tapped one paw directly onto the mysterious circle. Ethan stared. "You interested in this one?" Shadow's ears twitched. The dog repeated the motion. Same location, same mark. A coincidence. Maybe, except Shadow wasn't a dog built on coincidence. Outside, clouds began gathering again. Another storm approached from the west. The mountains darkened beneath the afternoon sky. The cabin suddenly felt isolated once more. And somewhere out there, Ethan knew Derek Holloway wasn't finished. Not after driving into the wilderness with a $100,000 offer. Not after asking about unusual discoveries. Not after staring at the fireplace. The man knew something. The only question was how much. That night, after darkness swallowed the lake again, Ethan stepped outside to gather firewood. The air felt colder, sharper, storm air. Snow would arrive before morning. Shadow remained close, watching the trees, watching everything. Then Ethan saw it, a flash, brief, almost invisible, far beyond the shoreline, deep among the pines, a beam of light. Gone. Then another, flashlights, moving through the forest, watching the cabin, watching him. And suddenly Ethan realized he wasn't the only one searching for Samuel Cross's secrets. The flashlights disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. Tiny points of light vanished among the dark pines surrounding the frozen lake. The storm clouds above continued rolling over the mountains. Heavy, dark, relentless. Shadow stood beside him, ears forward, body rigid. The German shepherd's eyes never left the forest. Neither did Ethan's. Years ago, during deployments, moments like this often came before something happened. Not always, but often enough. He trusted instincts that had kept him alive. And every instinct told him the people in those woods were not hikers. They were searching. The same way Holloway had been searching. The same way Samuel Cross had hidden things. Everything connected somehow. The question was how. Ethan slowly backed toward the cabin. Shadow moved with him. Neither turned their backs on the trees. Once inside, Ethan locked the door and secured the windows. Again. The storm arrived shortly after midnight. Snow slammed against the cabin walls. Wind howled across the frozen lake. Tree branches scraped against the roof. By dawn, nearly a foot of fresh snow covered the mountains. The tracks from Holloway's SUV were gone. The flashlights were gone. Everything appeared untouched, as if nothing had happened. But Ethan knew better. The journals sat open on the kitchen table, waiting. One entry kept pulling his attention. The page described an old fire lookout north of the property, a forgotten structure abandoned decades earlier. Samuel had visited it repeatedly. The location appeared on multiple maps, far more often than anywhere else. That alone made it important. Ethan studied the route while drinking coffee heated over the wood stove. The trail would be difficult after the storm, maybe impossible. Then Shadow walked over and placed his paw directly on the same marked location. Again, the exact same place. Ethan stared at him. "You really want to go there, don't you?" Shadow's tail thumped once. Not playful, certain, almost purposeful. Ethan smiled despite himself. The dog had led him through worse places than Wyoming mountains. And more than once, Shadow had noticed things long before humans did. Maybe this was another one of those times. An hour later, they left the cabin. The mountains looked transformed. Fresh snow covered everything. The forest sparkled beneath morning sunlight. Pine trees carried heavy white crowns. The frozen lake reflected silver light into the valley. Beautiful, silent, and somehow unsettling. Ethan followed the old logging road shown on Samuel's map. Most of it had disappeared beneath snowdrifts. The route climbed steadily into higher elevation. Shadow led the way, moving confidently, stopping occasionally to verify direction. The farther they climbed, the more isolated the world became. No roads, no houses, no signs of civilization, only wilderness. After nearly 2 hours, Ethan noticed something unusual. Tracks. Fresh tracks, human, partially covered by snowfall. But recent, very recent. Someone had traveled this route after the storm. Shadow found them too. The dog lowered his nose, following carefully. The tracks headed toward the same destination, toward the fire lookout. A cold feeling settled into Ethan's stomach. He continued forward, now moving more cautiously. The trail eventually opened onto a rocky ridge, overlooking miles of forest. The view was breathtaking. Mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Snow-covered valleys shimmered beneath sunlight. And standing near the edge of the ridge sat the remains of the old lookout, or what was left of it. The structure had partially collapsed years ago. One wall leaned inward, half the roof had fallen. Weather and time had nearly erased it. Yet something immediately caught Ethan's attention. Footprints, several sets. Recent, very recent. Someone had been here within days, maybe hours. Shadow entered first. The dog moved carefully through the ruined building, nose working constantly. Searching, Ethan followed. The interior looked abandoned, at first. Then he noticed subtle signs. An empty water bottle, fresh cigarette ash, a boot print in the dust. People had definitely been here. Not decades ago. Recently, very recently. Shadow stopped beside a collapsed desk. His tail stiffened, then he barked. One sharp bark. Ethan knelt beside him. Beneath broken boards sat a rusted metal box, hidden. Deliberately, he pulled it free. The lock had long ago corroded away. Inside lay several weathered journals, more documents, more maps. Samuel's handwriting covered nearly every page. Ethan's pulse quickened. The old man had hidden records everywhere, as if he never trusted any single location. As if he expected someone might eventually come looking. The first journal described veterans arriving at the cabin throughout the late 1980s. Then the 1990s. Then the years after. Not tourists, not hunters, veterans, former soldiers, military handlers, retired K-9 teams. Men struggling to reconnect with life after service. Men carrying invisible wounds. Ethan turned page after page. Reading stories that felt painfully familiar. Nightmares, isolation, broken families, lost careers, survivor's guilt, the same battles he had fought, the same battles he still fought. One passage stopped him cold. Many of them arrive believing they are alone. They aren't. The mountain teaches them that. Healing begins when someone finally realizes another wounded soul understands. Ethan stared at the words. For several seconds he couldn't move, because they felt written directly to him. The cabin, the journals, the inheritance. Maybe Samuel knew exactly what Ethan needed, even before Ethan did. Shadow nudged his arm gently. The familiar gesture pulled him back. The dog always seemed to know when certain memories became too heavy. Ethan rubbed behind his ears. Good timing, buddy. Shadow leaned into him. The simple contact helped. It always did. They continued searching. More journals revealed more names. Former Marines, Army Rangers, Air Force personnel, dog handlers, combat medics, dozens, maybe hundreds, all connected through the cabin, through Samuel, through some mission larger than Ethan understood. Then something else appeared. A folded map hidden between journal pages. Unlike the others, this one contained only a single marking, a red circle. Nothing more, no labels, no explanations, no notes, just a location. Several miles deeper into the mountains, far beyond the lookout, far beyond the cabin. Ethan unfolded it completely, his eyes narrowed. The location sat near an abandoned smokehouse marked on older survey maps. A place nobody had mentioned, not once. Not in town, not in the inheritance paperwork, not in any journal, only this map. As if Samuel wanted someone to find it eventually. But only after finding everything else first. Shadow suddenly moved toward a broken section of wall. The dog began sniffing aggressively, then pawing at the floor. Ethan joined him. Beneath loose boards lay another item, small notebook, different handwriting, not Samuel's. The final page contained only one sentence, written hastily, almost desperately. If anything happens, the truth is beneath the mountain. Ethan read it twice, then a third time. Beneath the mountain. The same area marked on Samuel's map. The same location near the abandoned smokehouse. The same place nobody wanted mentioned. Wind suddenly rattled the damaged lookout. The structure groaned. Snow drifted through gaps in the walls. The sun was already lowering behind distant ridges. They needed to return before dark. But Ethan knew one thing now. The lookout had answered some questions. And created even bigger ones. The hidden mission wasn't over. Not even close. As he packed the journals into his backpack, Shadow moved to the doorway. The dog stared toward the distant mountains. Toward the location marked on the map. Toward whatever Samuel had hidden beneath them. And for the first time since inheriting the cabin, Ethan felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Not because he had found treasure. Not because he had discovered secrets. But because the journals proved something he desperately needed to hear. He was never as alone as he thought. Hundreds of veterans had walked this path before him. Hundreds had fought similar battles. Hundreds had come here searching for peace. Yet as Ethan and Shadow began the long trek back toward the cabin, another thought settled into his mind. If others had found this place before, then someone else might already be heading toward the location marked on that map, and whatever waited beneath the mountain. Someone was willing to spend $100,000 to find it first. The realization stayed with Ethan all the way back to the cabin. The sun disappeared behind the western peaks. Long shadows stretched across the frozen lake. Snow glowed blue beneath the fading light. Shadow moved ahead along the trail, occasionally glancing back to make sure Ethan followed. The German shepherd's confidence never seemed shaken, not by storms, not by strange discoveries, not even by the growing sense that someone else was hunting the same secrets. By the time they reached the cabin, darkness had settled over the mountains. The air felt colder, sharper. The wind carried the promise of another storm. Ethan lit the lanterns and spread Samuel's maps across the kitchen table. The newly discovered map sat in the center. The red circle seemed almost deliberate in its simplicity. No explanation, no warning, no instructions, just a destination. Shadow rested beside the fireplace, while Ethan studied every inch of the route. The location sat nearly 6 miles north of the property. Deep wilderness, difficult terrain, no marked roads. No structures listed on modern county maps, yet Samuel had gone there repeatedly. That much was obvious. Ethan leaned back and rubbed his tired eyes. The cabin creaked softly around him. Outside, snow drifted against the windows. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long while. Purpose, not survival, not endurance. Purpose. The difference mattered. His phone suddenly buzzed. The sound startled him. Cell service barely existed in the mountains. He checked the screen. Unknown number. Ethan almost ignored it. Almost. Then he answered. Yeah, a woman's voice came through. Professional, calm. Mr. Cross? Who's asking? My name is Laura Jennings. I'm an attorney in Cheyenne. Ethan frowned. Lawyers rarely called men living in mountain cabins. What can I do for you? A brief pause. I'm handling portions of your Uncle Samuel Cross's estate records. Ethan sat upright. What records? Additional documents were discovered after the original transfer. His attention sharpened immediately. What kind of documents? I'd prefer to discuss them in person. The answer irritated him. I live 3 hours from Cheyenne. I'm aware. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she continued. Mr. Cross, your uncle spent decades building something very unusual. Ethan looked toward the journals. Toward the photographs, toward Patriot's collar. I've started figuring that out. Another pause. Then she said something that stopped him cold. There are people who have been trying to purchase that property for nearly 20 years. His eyes narrowed. Holloway. You've met him. Yesterday, Laura sighed. Then please be careful. The words carried genuine concern. Not performance, not legal caution. Real concern. Why? The attorney hesitated. As far as official records show, your uncle owned one isolated cabin. Ethan waited. Laura continued. But the financial records suggest he maintained something much larger. The call cut out before she could finish. The signal vanished. The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone, then slowly looked back toward the map. Something much larger. The phrase echoed inside his head. Shadow lifted his head, watching him, waiting. Ethan folded the map carefully. Decision made. They would leave at first light. The mountain had answers, and Ethan was tired of questions. The next morning dawned cold and clear. The sky stretched bright blue above the Bighorn Mountains. The temperature barely climbed above 10 degrees. By 7 o'clock, Ethan and Shadow were already moving north. The journey proved harder than expected. The terrain climbed steadily through dense pine forests. Snowdrifts reached knee-height in places. Frozen streams crossed the route. Old logging roads appeared and disappeared beneath years of neglect. Yet Shadow never hesitated. The dog followed the map's direction with uncanny confidence, almost as if he already knew where they were going. Hours passed. The forest grew quieter. Even the birds seemed absent. The silence felt strange, not peaceful, watchful. Around noon, they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a deep valley. Ethan stopped. Something wasn't right. Shadow had noticed it too. The dog froze, ears forward, body rigid, listening. Ethan scanned the area. Nothing moved, nothing visible. Yet the feeling remained. Someone had been there recently. Then he found proof. A boot print, fresh, partially hidden beneath loose snow. Not his, not old, recent, very recent. The print headed in the same direction they were traveling, toward the red circle, toward whatever Samuel had hidden. Ethan followed. The ridge eventually descended into a heavily wooded basin. The trees grew thicker there. Older, towering pines blocked much of the sunlight. The air felt colder beneath their shadows. Then Shadow stopped, completely. The dog stared ahead, tail rigid, breathing slower, focused. Ethan followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then the structure emerged from the trees. An old smokehouse, weathered, half collapsed, nearly swallowed by the forest. Exactly where the map said it would be. The building looked abandoned. Decades abandoned. Yet something about it felt wrong. Too intact, too deliberate, as if someone wanted it to appear forgotten. Ethan approached cautiously. The wood had aged silver with time. Snow covered most of the roof. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Shadow moved ahead, sniffing, searching. Then the dog barked, once, sharp, direct. He wasn't interested in the doorway. He was interested in the ground. Specifically the rear corner of the structure. Ethan joined him. The dog pawed repeatedly at packed snow. Beneath it sat a metal ring, attached to something hidden. Ethan cleared more snow. His pulse quickened, a steel hatch, nearly invisible. Hidden beneath decades of weather and debris, he stared at it, then looked at Shadow. The dog stared back, as if asking why he was surprised. Ethan grabbed the ring, pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then the hatch groaned. Rust cracked, metal shifted, cold air rushed upward from below. Not earth, not decay. Preserved air, the smell of old paper, old machinery, old secrets. Ethan's flashlight beam disappeared into darkness. Concrete steps descended beneath the mountain, far deeper than expected, far larger than a simple cellar. His heartbeat accelerated. Shadow immediately moved toward the entrance. Ready, alert. Ethan followed. The staircase descended nearly 20 feet. Concrete walls surrounded them. Military-grade construction. Solid. Deliberate. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment. Rows of metal shelving stretched across the room. File cabinets, storage crates, military footlockers, maps, records. Hundreds of boxes, maybe thousands. The beam of his flashlight moved slowly across faded labels. Veteran records, handler files, emergency housing, canine medical logs, trust accounts. The scale was overwhelming. This wasn't a hidden room. This was an archive, an entire hidden operation, a lifetime of work. Samuel hadn't simply sheltered veterans. He had built something extraordinary. Shadow moved deeper into the chamber. His claws clicked softly against concrete. The dog stopped beside one wall lined with photographs. Ethan approached. The images covered decades, veterans, military dogs, families reunited, handlers standing beside aging canine partners, people smiling for perhaps the first time in years. Every photograph carried a date, every photograph carried a story, and every story led back to the cabin, back to Samuel, back to this mountain. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not grief, something deeper, respect. The old man had dedicated his life to helping people nobody else noticed. People like Ethan. People like Shadow. Then he discovered the financial records, neatly organized, protected, detailed. Years of transactions, donations, land agreements, trust documents, and one pattern became immediately obvious. The same name appeared repeatedly. Derek Holloway. Over and over. Offers, requests, purchase attempts, failed negotiations, letters, legal inquiries. For nearly 20 years, Holloway had been trying to acquire this property. Not because of the cabin, not because of the land, because he knew something existed here, something valuable, something hidden. Shadow suddenly barked. Ethan turned. The dog stood beside a heavy steel door at the far end of the chamber. Unlike everything else, this room remained locked. No labels, no markings, no references. Even Samuel's journals had never mentioned it. Shadow pawed at the door, then looked back at Ethan, waiting. The steel lock remained intact, untouched, sealed. And somehow Ethan knew the biggest secret in the entire mountain waited behind it. The steel door stood at the far end of the underground archive, silent, unmarked, different from everything else Samuel Cross had left behind. Every cabinet in the bunker carried labels. Every shelf had organization. Every box had purpose, but not this door. This door was meant to stay hidden. Shadow sat beside it, waiting. The German shepherd's amber eyes reflected the beam of Ethan's flashlight. The dog pawed once against the metal, then looked back. Ethan walked slowly across the concrete floor. His boots echoed through the chamber. The sound felt unusually loud, as though the mountain itself was listening. He examined the lock, old military grade, heavy enough to survive decades, yet something caught his attention. The lock wasn't rusted, unlike the hatch outside, unlike many of the shelves, unlike the smokehouse itself. This lock had been maintained, recently. Someone had opened this room long after Samuel built it. A chill moved through Ethan's chest. He checked the surrounding walls. Nothing. No clues, no notes, no instructions. Then Shadow suddenly moved away from the door. The dog crossed the room and stopped beside an old desk tucked into a corner. Ethan followed. A faded photograph sat inside an open drawer. Samuel stood beside a younger German shepherd, Patriot, the same dog from the collar and photographs. Behind the picture rested a small brass key. Ethan stared at it, then looked toward the locked room. The key matched the size of the lock almost perfectly. Samuel had hidden it in plain sight, not buried, not locked away, waiting, as if he trusted only one person would eventually find it. Ethan slipped the key into his pocket. His pulse had begun to quicken. The room suddenly felt warmer, smaller. The same feeling he used to get before opening sealed intelligence packets overseas. The sense that life might look different afterward. Shadow returned to the steel door, waiting patiently. Ethan inserted the key. The mechanism resisted at first, then turned. A loud metallic click echoed through the bunker. The lock released. For several seconds, neither Ethan nor Shadow moved. Then Ethan pulled the handle. The heavy door opened slowly. Cold air drifted outward, still, preserved. The flashlight beam pushed into darkness. What he found inside wasn't what he expected. No gold, no weapons, no hidden fortune, just shelves, photographs, boxes, filing cabinets, and a single desk positioned in the center of the room. The space looked more personal than the rest of the archive, almost private, like a study, like a place Samuel visited alone. Ethan stepped inside. The room felt untouched. The dust lay undisturbed. Everything remained exactly where it had been left. Then his flashlight landed on a label. A single file drawer. One name, Ethan Cross. His breath stopped. For a moment he thought he was mistaken. He moved closer. The label remained. Ethan Cross. The drawer contained only one file, thick, organized, waiting. His hands felt strangely heavy as he opened it. Inside sat military records, his military records, service evaluations, deployment reports, training certifications, medical documents, newspaper clippings, photographs, dozens of photographs. Ethan stared in disbelief. One image showed him during Bud Sutt's training nearly 30 years earlier. Another captured his team during a deployment overseas. Another showed him carrying Shadow after an explosion years ago. The memories came rushing back. Dust, smoke, heat, the sound of alarms, Shadow's injured body, the desperate sprint through danger to reach him. The photograph trembled slightly in Ethan's hand. He lowered it carefully. Who had collected all this? How? Why? Shadow rested his head gently against Ethan's leg. The familiar contact steadied him. Then Ethan noticed another envelope, cream-colored, sealed. His name written across the front, not typed, handwritten. Samuel's handwriting. Ethan sat down slowly at the desk. The room seemed impossibly quiet. Only the faint hum of distant ventilation echoed through the mountain. His fingers broke the seal. The letter unfolded easily. The paper had yellowed with age, yet the writing remained clear. If you're reading this, Ethan, then Shadow got you here. That sounds strange, but I suspect it's true. Good dogs often understand their mission before their handlers do. Ethan felt a faint smile touch his face. Only briefly. Then he continued reading. You probably don't remember me very well. That was my fault. Distance became easier after the war. I spent most of my life avoiding people who reminded me of myself. The words felt painfully honest. Samuel continued, but I followed your life more closely than you realize. I watched your career. I read every article I could find. I knew about your deployments. I knew about the explosion that nearly killed Shadow. I knew about your divorce. I knew about the years afterward. Ethan lowered the letter. His throat felt tight. No one had paid attention for a very long time. Not like this. Not quietly. Not without wanting something, he continued reading. I never met Shadow, but I knew everything I needed to know about him the day I saw the photograph of you carrying him through that explosion. A man reveals his character when nobody is watching. You chose loyalty over convenience. You chose responsibility over comfort. You refused to leave a wounded teammate behind. That matters. More than medals. More than rank. More than money. Ethan swallowed hard. The room blurred slightly. He blinked several times, then continued. The cabin was never meant for the strongest person. It was meant for the right person. Somebody who understood sacrifice. Somebody who still believed loyalty had value. Somebody willing to protect others even after life stopped protecting them. Shadow pressed closer. The dog's warmth grounded him, anchored him. Samuel's final paragraphs grew more personal. The veterans who came here weren't broken. Neither are you. People call it damage because they don't understand what survival costs. But surviving isn't weakness. Neither is needing help. Remember that. The words struck harder than Ethan expected. Harder than any legal document. Harder than any discovery in the bunker. Because Samuel somehow understood things Ethan rarely admitted aloud. The nightmares, the isolation, the exhaustion, the years spent pretending everything was fine. He turned to the final page. The handwriting grew slightly shakier there. Age, perhaps, or illness. If you're reading this, then the mission isn't over. It never was. The mountain protected people before you arrived. Now it's your turn. But understand something important. Someone will come for what I protected. Someone always does. They won't be looking for money. They'll be looking for control. Don't give it to them. Trust Shadow. Trust the mountain. And when the time comes, remember why this place exists. For the first time in years, Ethan felt tears forming. Unexpected, unwelcome, impossible to stop. He lowered his head. The letter remained open in his hands. Shadow moved closer. The old shepherd gently rested his chin across Ethan's knee. No commands, no training, no words, just presence. The same thing he had offered through every dark season. The same thing he offered now. Ethan laughed softly through the emotion. A broken laugh, honest. You knew, didn't you? Shadow's ears twitched. The dog looked up at him, waiting, always waiting. The room felt different now. Not mysterious, not threatening. Personal. Samuel hadn't chosen Ethan by accident. The inheritance wasn't random. The cabin, the journals, the archive. Everything had been left intentionally. Everything pointed toward one purpose. Then Ethan noticed something else inside the file. A folded document hidden beneath the letter. He opened it. His expression changed instantly. The paper contained recent notes. Very recent. Only months old. Samuel's handwriting again. Several names appeared throughout the page. Veterans, lawyers, volunteers, and one name circled repeatedly. Derek Holloway. Beneath it, Samuel had written only one sentence. He knows enough to be dangerous, not enough to win. Ethan stared at the words. The warmth he had felt moments earlier disappeared. Something darker replaced it. Concern. Because Samuel had expected Holloway, expected conflict, expected a fight. And apparently, that fight had already begun long before Ethan arrived. Shadow suddenly lifted his head, listening. The shepherd's posture changed instantly. Alert, focused, military. Ethan recognized the shift immediately. Something outside, something real. He rose and extinguished the flashlight. The room fell into darkness. The bunker seemed to hold its breath. Then faintly, from somewhere above the mountain, came the distant sound of an engine. Not one, several, moving through the snow, heading toward the property, heading toward Samuel's secrets. And for the first time since entering the hidden room, Ethan understood exactly what Samuel meant. Someone was coming. The sound echoed faintly through the mountain. Engines, more than one, muffled by snow and distance, but unmistakable. Shadow was already moving. The German shepherd stood rigid near the bunker entrance, ears forward, eyes fixed toward the ceiling, as if he could see straight through rock and timber. Ethan slipped Samuel's letter into his jacket. The file bearing his name followed. Then several trust documents. Instinct took over. Years of training, years of surviving dangerous situations. Keep what matters. Move quickly. Stay calm. The bunker suddenly felt different. Not like a discovery, like a target. The distant engines grew louder. Then came another sound. Truck doors, voices. Shadow released a low growl. Ethan killed his flashlight immediately. Darkness swallowed the archive. Only thin emergency lights near the ceiling remained visible. He moved toward the main chamber. The underground refuge that had felt sacred moments earlier now felt vulnerable. His eyes landed on an old wall map. A red line marked something he hadn't noticed before. Emergency exit route. The path led west through a drainage tunnel. Samuel really had planned for everything. Above them, footsteps crunched across snow. A metallic clang echoed through the bunker. Someone had found the hatch. Ethan's pulse slowed. The strange calm arrived. The same calm that always appeared when things became serious. Fear disappeared. Focus replaced it. Shadow pressed against his leg, ready, waiting. The voices grew clearer. "Check around the smokehouse," another voice answered. "You think he found it?" A third voice laughed. If he inherited the place, he found something. Ethan recognized none of them, but he didn't need to. The men were searching, and they weren't here for sightseeing. Shadow's growl deepened. The shepherd stared toward the ceiling, tracking movement, counting positions, just like he used to do overseas. Ethan opened the nearest cabinet. Inside sat waterproof storage bags. He quickly filled one with the most important records. Trust ledgers, veteran files, financial documents, Samuel's journals, everything he could carry. The voices above moved closer. Then came the unmistakable sound of metal striking metal. Someone testing the hatch. The mountain seemed to hold its breath. Ethan grabbed the pack. "Let's go." Shadow moved instantly. Together they crossed the chamber toward the drainage tunnel. The entrance hid behind old shelving units. Almost invisible. Samuel had disguised it well. The steel door resisted at first, then opened. Freezing air rushed inside. Snowflakes drifted through the narrow passage. The tunnel sloped downward. Dark, tight, silent. Behind them, another metallic crash echoed from above. The hatch was giving way. Ethan stepped into the tunnel. Shadow followed. The steel door closed quietly behind them. Darkness surrounded them. The beam from Ethan's flashlight cut through dust and old concrete. Water dripped somewhere ahead. The tunnel stretched farther than expected, long enough to reach beyond the ridge, long enough to escape unseen. They moved carefully. The floor remained slick in places. Ice covered portions of the passage. Shadow stayed close, occasionally glancing back, listening. Halfway through the tunnel, Ethan heard it, a distant crash, then shouting. The hatch had opened. The bunker had been found. He kept moving. The tunnel finally ended beneath a concealed opening near a frozen creek. Moonlight illuminated the forest. Snow continued falling, not heavily, but steadily. The storm was returning. Ethan emerged first. Shadow followed. The cold hit immediately. The temperature had dropped sharply. The mountain felt empty, wild, dangerous. Exactly the way Samuel intended. The hidden exit sat nearly half a mile from the smokehouse. Good distance. Good concealment. Yet Ethan knew they couldn't stay. The men would eventually search the surrounding area. He checked the map. The cabin sat several miles south. Too exposed. Too obvious. Then he remembered another marking. A small emergency shelter Samuel had noted on an older map. Northwest, near an abandoned ranger route. Not ideal, but safer. Shadow suddenly froze. The dog turned toward the creek, growling softly. Ethan followed his gaze. Movement. Far away. Flashlights. Sweeping through the trees. The search had already begun. He tightened the backpack straps. Time to move. The storm strengthened as they crossed the ridge. Wind drove snow sideways. Branches creaked overhead. Visibility dropped steadily. The mountain became a maze of white shadows. Hours passed. The terrain grew more difficult. Steeper, more dangerous. Twice Ethan nearly lost the trail. Twice Shadow corrected him. The dog somehow always seemed to know where to go. Then disaster struck. The creek crossing appeared simple enough. Frozen, snow-covered, quiet. Ethan stepped forward. The ice shattered instantly. A loud crack exploded beneath him. One leg plunged into black water. The current grabbed him. Cold slammed through his body like electricity. For a terrifying second, the ice around him continued, him breaking. The creek threatened to pull him under. Then Shadow hit him, hard. The German Shepherd lunged sideways. His weight shifted Ethan backward. Enough, just enough. Ethan slammed onto solid ice. The frozen shelf collapsed where he'd been standing. Black water churned beneath. His heart hammered. The cold burned through his soaked pant leg. Shadow stood above him, breathing heavily, alert, focused. The dog had saved him again. Good boy. His voice sounded rough. Shadow stepped closer, then suddenly yelped. Ethan looked down. The shepherd's front paw bled onto the snow. A sharp section of broken ice had sliced deep into the pad. Blood stained the white ground. For a moment, Ethan's stomach dropped. Not Shadow. Not after everything. He knelt immediately. The wound looked painful, but manageable. The dog remained calm, trusting, as always. Ethan removed a field dressing from his pack, carefully wrapped the paw. Shadow never complained, never pulled away. When the bandage was secure, the shepherd leaned against him briefly, then stood, ready to continue, even injured, even exhausted. Ethan swallowed hard. The loyalty never stopped humbling him. The storm intensified. Snow now erased their tracks almost immediately. A blessing and a danger. Near midnight, they finally spotted the shelter. A small structure hidden beneath a rocky overhang, half buried in snow, nearly invisible. The emergency refuge Samuel had marked decades earlier. The door creaked when Ethan pushed it open. Inside stood a single wood stove, 2 bunks, several blankets, and supplies carefully stored in waterproof containers. Samuel again, always prepared, always thinking ahead. The place smelled of cedar and old smoke, safe for now. Ethan lit a lantern. Warm light filled the shelter. Shadow collapsed onto a blanket. The injured paw stretched awkwardly before him. Ethan cleaned the wound properly. The dog rested his head in Ethan's lap during the entire process. Outside, the blizzard roared. Inside, the shelter remained warm, quiet, protected. For the first time all day, Ethan opened the documents he had carried from the bunker. One folder immediately caught his attention. Holloway Development Group. His pulse quickened. The file contained contracts, land surveys, financial statements, years of correspondence. The deeper he read, the worse it became. Protected veteran trust land, manipulated valuations, false ownership claims, illegal development proposals. Records proving someone had spent years trying to gain control of land never intended for profit. The evidence was overwhelming. Ethan stared at the pages. This wasn't about hidden money. Not anymore. It was about exposing something much larger. Something Samuel had spent decades protecting. Shadow lifted his head, listening. The wind outside shifted. Then came a distant sound. An engine, somewhere beyond the storm, still searching, still hunting. Ethan closed the folder. The truth finally settled into place. Derek Holloway hadn't been chasing treasure. He had been chasing evidence. And now Ethan possessed proof powerful enough to destroy everything Holloway had built. The realization settled over him slowly as the storm battered the emergency shelter. Outside, snow whipped across the mountains in endless waves of white. Inside, the lantern cast a warm circle of light against rough wooden walls. Shadow slept beside the stove. The German shepherd's injured paw rested on a folded blanket. Every so often, his ears twitched. Even asleep, he remained alert, a protector, a soldier, a friend. Ethan sat at the small table and stared at the stack of documents. Hours earlier, he had believed the inheritance was a mystery. Now he understood it was a responsibility. Samuel Cross had spent decades protecting something far more important than land. He had protected people, veterans, handlers, military dogs, families' lives. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any pack Ethan had ever carried. The storm howled outside. The shelter creaked softly. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt completely alone with his thoughts. That was both comforting and dangerous, because silence had a way of awakening memories. He glanced toward Shadow. The dog opened one eye, then relaxed again. The simple gesture grounded him, kept him anchored. Ethan returned to the files. Near the bottom of the waterproof bag sat a weathered envelope. His name appeared on the front, written in Samuel's careful handwriting. Ethan Cross. For when you are finally ready. His throat tightened. Slowly he opened it. Inside were several letters, the oldest dated back nearly 15 years. Long before the inheritance. Long before Ethan lost everything. Long before homelessness. Long before the divorce. The first letter began simply. If you are reading this, then Shadow probably found what I could never fully explain. Ethan smiled despite himself. That sounded exactly like Samuel, direct, honest, never wasting words. The letter continued. Samuel described following Ethan's military career from a distance, not interfering, not intruding, simply watching, proud, observing, believing. There were references to deployments, commendations, stories Ethan had forgotten, stories Samuel somehow knew. The deeper Ethan read, the more emotional the words became. You remind me of the men who built this place. Not because you are strong, not because you served, because you never abandoned anyone, not even when it cost you everything. Ethan stopped reading. His eyes burned. For years he had heard different descriptions of himself. Failure, broken veteran, unstable, homeless, burden. But not this. Never this, he continued. The next pages explained the true purpose of Summit Ridge. The cabin had only been the entrance. The real mission had always been hidden. During the late 1980s, Samuel and several retired military handlers quietly began creating a refuge, a place where wounded veterans could disappear from the noise, a place where retired military working dogs could spend their final years surrounded by people who understood them, a place free from judgment, free from bureaucracy, free from pity. The idea had started small, a cabin, a few acres, a handful of volunteers. Over time it grew. More veterans arrived, more dogs arrived. Stories spread quietly through military communities. Men who couldn't sleep, women struggling to reconnect with life, handlers grieving the loss of partners. All found temporary peace there. Ethan stared at old photographs included with the letters. Veterans sitting around campfires, dogs sleeping beside them. Snow-covered mornings, fishing trips, barbecues, smiles, real smiles. Not forced ones, not polite ones, healing smiles. Something tightened in his chest, because he understood those faces, understood those eyes. They were the eyes of people fighting battles nobody else could see. People like him. People like Shadow. Another letter explained why the archive had remained hidden. Years earlier, developers discovered the trust land contained significant value. Not gold, not oil, something simpler. Location, control, expansion opportunities. The surrounding properties were attractive for luxury development projects. Large profits, huge investments, but the trust prevented those plans. As long as the records survived, the land remained protected. So people began trying to buy it, pressure it, challenge it, erase it. Samuel documented every attempt, every threat, every suspicious offer, including many from companies eventually connected to Derek Holloway. Ethan sat back. The pieces finally fit together. Holloway hadn't suddenly become interested in a worthless cabin. The man had spent years chasing control of the property. The inheritance merely interrupted his plans. A soft sound pulled Ethan from his thoughts. Shadow had awakened. The shepherd limped across the room and rested his head against Ethan's knee. Ethan scratched behind his ears. "You knew, didn't you?" Shadow's tail thumped once. The dog looked up at him with those familiar, intelligent eyes. Eyes that seemed to understand far more than they should. For several minutes, neither moved. The storm continued outside. The shelter remained warm. The moment felt peaceful, the kind of peace Ethan had forgotten existed. Then he found the final letter, the most recent one. The paper looked newer, the handwriting slightly weaker. Samuel must have written it shortly before his death. Ethan unfolded it carefully. The first line stopped him cold. "If you're reading this, then I wasn't wrong about you. You stayed. Most people would have sold the cabin. Most people would have taken the money. You didn't. That means you understand something important. The inheritance was never meant to reward you. It was meant to trust you." Ethan swallowed hard. The words hit deeper than Samuel could have known. For years, Ethan had believed his life was over, that everything meaningful belonged to the past. Yet somehow an old man he barely knew had looked at his life and seen something worth trusting. The letter continued. "There will come a day when you must choose whether this place survives. If that day arrives, remember something. The mission is not the cabin. The mission is not the archive. The mission is the people who still need both." Ethan lowered the letter. The room blurred slightly. He wiped his eyes before the tears could fully form. Outside, the storm finally began weakening. The wind softened. The shelter grew quieter. A strange sense of clarity settled over him. For years he had wandered, survived, endured, but survival was not purpose. Samuel understood that, maybe better than Ethan himself. Shadow nudged him gently. The dog seemed calmer now, safer. As if he sensed something had changed. Maybe it had. Hours passed. The lantern burned lower. Eventually, Ethan organized the files into separate stacks. Evidence, trust records, veteran archives, legal documents. Everything Samuel had protected. Everything Holloway wanted. Everything worth defending. Near dawn, the storm finally passed. The mountain emerged beneath pale blue light. Snow sparkled across endless ridges. The world looked untouched, pure, silent. For the first time in years, Ethan stepped outside and felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Not certainty, not victory, just hope. It was enough. He stood overlooking the wilderness while Shadow sat beside him. The injured shepherd leaned lightly against his leg. Partners watching another sunrise. One more mission ahead. One more fight waiting. Then Ethan's phone vibrated. The sound startled him. There had been no signal during the storm. Now a single bar appeared. A voicemail notification flashed. Unknown number. He listened. A professional female voice spoke immediately. "Mr. Cross, my name is Rebecca Grant. I'm an attorney representing the Summit Ridge Veteran Trust." Ethan straightened. The message continued. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. We have a serious problem." A pause. Then words that sent a chill through him. Derek Holloway has filed an emergency legal challenge against the inheritance. The mountains suddenly felt colder. The voice continued. He intends to claim ownership rights over the property and freeze all trust assets pending review. Another pause. You need to contact me immediately. The message ended. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. The battle had changed. No longer hidden in forests. No longer buried beneath mountains. Now it would happen in courtrooms. Documents, lawyers, judges. A different kind of battlefield. Shadow stood beside him, watching, waiting, ready. And as the morning sun rose above the snowy peaks, Ethan realized the next fight had already begun. The mountains behind him stretched endlessly beneath fresh snow. The wilderness looked peaceful, untouched, silent. But peace had a way of hiding battles. Ethan knew that better than most. Shadow stood beside him at the edge of the ridge. The German shepherd's injured paw was healing. But the limp remained noticeable whenever he moved too quickly. The dog lifted his head toward the distant horizon, watching, listening, protecting. Some habits never disappeared. Ethan looked down at the phone again. The voicemail from attorney Rebecca Grant felt heavier every time he replayed it. A legal challenge, a courtroom, lawyers, judges, paperwork, the kind of battlefield he had spent his entire life avoiding. Yet there was no choice now. Samuel had trusted him. The veterans in the journals had trusted him. The dogs buried beneath the mountain had trusted him. Walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. By noon, the storm shelter was empty. The documents were packed carefully, inside waterproof containers. The most important files sat in a military duffel bag beside Ethan's seat. Shadow curled quietly on the passenger side beneath a thick blanket. The old pickup rolled south through the Wyoming mountains. Frozen valleys stretched beneath gray skies. Pine forests blurred past the windows. Small towns appeared and disappeared. Gas stations, feed stores, churches. Empty roads, America moving on with its day. Ethan drove mostly in silence. The memories came and went. Some were good. Most weren't. A sudden blast of air from a passing semi sent a loud metallic vibration through the truck. For a split second, the sound transformed Afghanistan. Dust, radio chatter, a vehicle strike, men shouting. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. His breathing shortened. Shadow immediately lifted his head. The dog rested his muzzle against Ethan's arm, grounding him, anchoring him, bringing him back. Wyoming. Not Afghanistan. Not anymore. Ethan exhaled slowly. Thanks, buddy. Shadow settled again. The crisis passed. Like always. By late afternoon, the skyline of Cheyenne emerged beneath low winter clouds. Traffic increased. Buildings replaced mountains. Civilization returned. The courthouse sat near the center of downtown. An old stone building with broad steps and tall windows. Cold wind swept through the streets. People hurried past carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Nobody paid attention to the aging truck pulling into the parking lot. Nobody noticed the former Navy SEAL climbing out. Nobody noticed the wounded military dog beside him. To most people, they were invisible. Rebecca Grant was waiting near the entrance. She stood beside a black sedan with a thick folder tucked beneath one arm. Mid-50s, sharp eyes, practical winter coat. The expression of someone who had spent her life solving difficult problems. When she spotted Ethan, she immediately noticed Shadow. Her face softened. That must be him. Ethan nodded. Shadow. The attorney crouched slightly. Shadow studied her, then accepted a scratch behind the ears. A good sign. Rebecca stood again. You both look exhausted. We've had a week. I can see that. Her smile disappeared quickly. We need to talk. Inside, the courthouse felt warm. Old wood, polished floors, radiator heat. The scent of paper and coffee. Rebecca led them to a small conference room. Documents covered the table, maps, property records, court filings, trust documents. Ethan sat. Shadow immediately positioned himself beside the chair. Guard position, Rebecca noticed. Military people always noticed military things. She opened a file. Holloway moved faster than I expected. Ethan listened quietly. He claims Samuel concealed assets tied to the property. So he's arguing the inheritance should be frozen until ownership is reviewed. Ethan frowned. Can he do that? He can try. Rebecca slid several pages toward him. He also submitted information from public records. Ethan glanced down. Housing history, financial records, employment records, the details of his collapse. Everything laid out neatly on paper, every failure, every setback, every painful chapter of his life. Rebecca spoke carefully. They're building a narrative. What kind? Her hesitation answered before the words did. A damaged veteran incapable of managing a multi-million-dollar trust. Silence filled the room. Shadow rested his head against Ethan's leg. The simple contact mattered, more than most people would understand. Rebecca continued. They'll use your Pete Z. Ethan stared at the documents. They'll use homelessness. More silence. They'll use everything. The room felt smaller, the walls closer, the air heavier. For years, Ethan had survived judgment. People assumed things when they saw an old truck, when they saw worn clothes, when they heard the word putz broken, dangerous, unstable, weak. He knew the labels had lived beneath them. Now those labels were becoming legal strategy. Rebecca leaned forward. Listen to me. Ethan looked up. The law isn't interested in perfection. Her voice remained calm. It's interested in facts. She tapped the trust documents. And facts are on our side. The hearing began the following morning. Courtroom 3B, second floor. 9 o'clock sharp. The room filled quickly. Local reporters, attorneys, observers, curious citizens. News of the trust had spread faster than expected. Money always attracted attention, especially when veterans were involved, especially when corruption might be involved. Ethan sat beside Rebecca. Shadow lay quietly beneath the table. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, watching, waiting. Across the room sat Derek Holloway. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive smile. Everything about him appeared controlled, polished, professional. But Ethan noticed something else. The eyes, cold, calculating, predatory. The same eyes he'd seen in men who treated people like assets, tools, obstacles. Judge Eleanor Harper entered exactly on time. The courtroom rose, then sat. Proceedings began. Holloway's attorney spoke first, confident, smooth, professional. He described concerns about management of the trust, questions regarding oversight, questions regarding financial responsibility, questions regarding stability. The words sounded polite, but the meaning remained clear. Attack, attack. The attorney eventually turned toward Ethan. Mr. Cross has a documented history of severe PT, Rebecca objected. The judge allowed limited discussion. The attorney continued. Mr. Cross has experienced homelessness. More objections. More arguments. The courtroom felt increasingly warm. Ethan focused on breathing, focused on shadow, focused on staying present. The attorney kept speaking. Every sentence peeled open another scar. Every statement reduced years of survival to bullet points on paper. Then it happened. Somewhere near the rear of the courtroom, a metal water bottle slipped from someone's hand. The bottle struck the floor. The sound exploded through the room. Sharp, violent, unexpected. For everyone else, it lasted a second. For Ethan, it lasted years. Dust, heat, gunfire, an explosion, a teammate screaming. The battlefield returned instantly. His chest tightened. Vision narrowed. The courtroom blurred. For one terrifying moment, Afghanistan replaced Wyoming. Then Shadow moved. The dog rose immediately, not barking, not panicking, simply pressing his body firmly against Ethan's leg. Weight, pressure, presence, training, loyalty, reality. The courtroom slowly returned. Wood paneling, judge, attorneys, civilian clothes, not war, not danger, not then. The silence that followed felt enormous. Everyone had seen it. Everyone. Holloway's attorney adjusted his tie. Almost satisfied. Almost. Then Ethan stood. Rebecca looked surprised. The judge looked curious. The courtroom became still. Ethan spoke quietly. No anger, no shouting, no performance, just truth. You want to know if Pete's D makes me unfit? Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Ethan continued. I spent years believing it did. The room remained silent. I lost my marriage. His voice stayed steady. I lost my home. A pause. I nearly lost myself. Several people lowered their eyes. But every morning I still got up. He rested a hand on Shadow's shoulder. This dog got up too. The shepherd looked toward him. Calm, faithful, present. Ethan continued. We survived because we refused to abandon each other. The courtroom listened. Every word, every breath, every silence. I've seen men break. His gaze moved across the room. I've seen women break. A pause. I've seen dogs carry wounds nobody could see. The room felt different now. Human. Real. Not legal. Not political. Real. Ethan looked directly at Holloway. The question isn't whether I have scars. Silence. The question is whether scars disqualify someone from protecting others. Nobody spoke. Not even Holloway. Ethan gestured toward the trust documents. That property helped veterans survive. His voice softened. It helped retired military dogs survive. Another pause. It saved lives. The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Then Ethan finished. If surviving hardship makes me unqualified, he looked down at Shadow, then back up. Then maybe we've forgotten what strength actually looks like. The courtroom remained silent long after he sat down. Even Holloway seemed unsettled. Judge Harper removed her glasses, studied the room, studied the documents, studied Ethan. Finally, she spoke. I will review the archive evidence personally. Her gaze shifted toward Holloway's legal team. Before making any ruling, something changed then, not visibly, not dramatically, but Ethan saw it. For the first time, Derek Holloway looked worried. The confidence remained, the smile remained. But underneath both sat fear, because the truth was finally becoming visible, and truth had a way of surviving. Just like veterans, just like loyal dogs, just like old cabins buried beneath mountains. The hearing ended hours later. No final decision, not yet. But as Ethan and Shadow stepped outside into the cold Wyoming afternoon, the battle felt different. The war wasn't over, not even close. Yet for the first time since inheriting the cabin, Ethan believed victory might actually be possible. Then Rebecca's phone rang. She listened. Her expression changed immediately. Ethan. He stopped walking. What is it? Rebecca stared at him, then at the trust files, then at Shadow. Her voice lowered. We just received another document from the archive review team. A pause. The records contained something nobody expected. Ethan felt a chill despite the cold. What? Rebecca swallowed. The evidence doesn't just expose fraud. Her eyes widened slightly. It connects Holloway's company to multiple illegal acquisitions of protected veteran trust land across 3 states. Silence. Traffic moved around them. Snow drifted across the courthouse steps. Shadow's ears lifted. And suddenly, Ethan understood. This was no longer a property dispute. This was something much bigger. Something capable of destroying everything Derek Holloway had spent decades building. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The winter wind swept across the courthouse steps. Traffic rolled through downtown Cheyenne. People hurried past, carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Normal life continued. Yet Ethan felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Rebecca held the newly discovered report against her chest. The investigators are verifying everything now, she said quietly. How bad is it? Rebecca looked toward the gray sky. Worse than we thought. Ethan waited. Holloway's company allegedly pressured multiple veteran trusts into selling protected land far below market value. She paused. Some properties disappeared entirely. The words landed heavily. Samuel's journals suddenly made even more sense. The warnings, the secrecy, the hidden archives, the decades of protection. Samuel had never been guarding money. He had been guarding evidence. Shadow sat beside Ethan, watching pedestrians move along the sidewalk. The German shepherd looked calm, steady. His injured paw was healing. His eyes seemed brighter than they had in months. Rebecca exhaled slowly. The judge has everything she needs now. Ethan looked toward the courthouse. Think we'll win? Rebecca gave a tired smile. I think the truth will. 3 days later, the ruling arrived. The hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. Judge Harper entered the courtroom carrying a thick stack of documents. The room felt different this time. Less tension, more anticipation. Even Holloway appeared uneasy. His confidence had begun to crack. The judge wasted no time. She reviewed the findings, The trust's legitimacy, the historical records, the veteran archives, the evidence connecting Summit Ridge to decades of charitable work. Then she addressed Holloway's challenge directly. After reviewing the evidence, she said firmly, "The court finds no legal basis to invalidate the inheritance." Silence filled the room. "The trust remains valid." Another pause. "Ownership remains with Ethan Cross under the conditions established by Samuel Cross." A murmur spread through the gallery. The judge continued. "Furthermore, evidence presented raises serious concerns regarding activities unrelated to this proceeding." Her eyes shifted toward Holloway's attorneys. "I am forwarding relevant documentation to appropriate authorities for review." That was all. No dramatic speech. No celebration, no applause, just truth, official, permanent. The gavel struck once, and it was over. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. He simply sat there, breathing, processing. Years of drifting, years of loss, years of believing life had already passed him by. Now something impossible had happened. He had won, not just for himself, for Samuel, for the veterans, for the dogs, for every story hidden inside those journals. Shadow nudged his hand. Ethan smiled. A real smile. The first one Rebecca had seen. Outside the courthouse, snow drifted softly across the city. Reporters gathered near the steps. Microphones appeared. Questions followed. Ethan ignored most of them. Attention had never interested him. Instead, he knelt beside Shadow. The shepherd looked back at him. Trusting, loyal, family. "We're going home," Ethan whispered. Shadow's tail moved once. That was enough. The drive back to the mountains felt different. The same roads, the same snow-covered valleys, the same frozen rivers winding through Wyoming. Yet everything looked brighter somehow. The burden Samuel had left behind no longer felt like a mystery. Now it felt like a mission. By sunset, the truck climbed the final ridge above the frozen lake. The cabin appeared through the pines. Smoke rose from the chimney. Golden light glowed through the windows. Someone was there. Ethan immediately slowed. Old habits assessment first. Shadow lifted his head, alert, watching, but he wasn't growling. That mattered. As they pulled into the clearing, Ethan recognized the vehicle parked beside the cabin. A weathered pickup. Old, practical, not threatening. A woman stepped onto the porch, Martha Whitaker, the retired schoolteacher who lived several miles down the lake. She had checked on Samuel occasionally during his final years. Martha smiled when she saw the truck. "Took you long enough." Ethan laughed softly. A strange sound, almost unfamiliar. "You break in?" "I brought food." She pointed toward the cabin. "That counts as permission." Inside, warmth wrapped around him immediately. Wood smoke, coffee, fresh bread. The scent felt like home, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Shadow limped toward the fireplace, then stopped. The German shepherd stared at the hearth. For a moment, Ethan wondered if another mystery had appeared. Instead, Shadow slowly lowered himself onto the rug, curled into a tight circle, and went to sleep. Not alert sleep. Not combat sleep, not survival sleep, real sleep, deep sleep, the kind he hadn't seen since before their last deployment. Ethan stood frozen. Watching, Martha noticed too. "First time?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah," the old woman smiled softly. "Dogs know." The following weeks transformed everything. Word spread, at first through veterans, then through families, then through local communities. People arrived carrying tools, lumber, paint, supplies, generators, blankets, food. No advertisements, no fundraising campaign. Just people helping. One veteran told another, then another. Soon trucks appeared almost every day. Retired mechanics, former military handlers, local ranchers, construction crews. People who had heard Samuel's story. People who wanted to help continue it. The cabin slowly came back to life. The roof was repaired. Broken windows replaced, the old dock rebuilt along the frozen shoreline, electrical systems upgraded, the water pump restored. Ethan worked beside everyone, hauling lumber, repairing walls, clearing snow, splitting firewood. For the first time in years, exhaustion felt good, purposeful, earned. The archives remained protected, the journals carefully organized, The trust officially renamed Summit Ridge House, a place for veterans, a place for retired military dogs, a place Samuel would have recognized. One snowy afternoon in late January, Ethan stood on the porch, watching volunteers finish repairs to the west wall. The mountains glowed beneath afternoon sunlight. The frozen lake sparkled. Laughter drifted across the clearing. Real laughter, not forced, not nervous, life. Behind him, Shadow walked slowly across the porch. The limp was nearly gone now. The shepherd sat beside Ethan. Together they watched the activity below. "You did this." Ethan scratched behind Shadow's ears. The dog leaned into the touch. For once, neither needed words. Several weeks later, another truck arrived. Old, rusted, covered in road salt. The driver parked carefully near the woodpile. For several moments he remained inside, as if debating whether to leave. Ethan recognized that hesitation. He had lived it. Finally, the door opened. An older Marine stepped out, gray beard, weathered face, heavy winter coat. Beside him emerged an aging Labrador. The dog moved slowly, arthritic, one eye clouded with age, but still loyal, still trying. The Marine approached the porch awkwardly. His duffel bag looked nearly empty. His eyes looked exhausted. "You're Ethan Cross?" Ethan nodded. The man glanced toward the cabin. Warm light glowed through the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. Voices drifted from inside. Life, hope. Safety things he clearly hadn't experienced in a while. A long silence passed. Then the Marine cleared his throat. "VA Outreach Office in Cody gave me this address." Ethan waited. The man looked embarrassed, ashamed, like asking for help hurt more than the hardship itself. "I was wondering," his voice cracked slightly, "if maybe there was room." The Labrador sat heavily beside him. The old dog leaned against his leg. Ethan looked at both of them. Then he remembered sleeping in his truck, remembered frozen nights, remembered feeling invisible, remembered Shadow sleeping beside him because there was nowhere else to go. The answer came easily. The easiest answer he had given in years. "Yeah." The Marine looked up. Ethan smiled. "There's room." The man's eyes watered immediately. He looked away, trying to hide it, trying to hold himself together. Ethan understood. No explanation necessary. Inside the cabin, Shadow appeared at the doorway. The shepherd studied the newcomer. Then he slowly approached the old Labrador. The two dogs touched noses. A brief greeting, a simple acceptance, nothing dramatic. Yet somehow it meant everything. The Marine saw it too. His shoulders relaxed for the first time since arriving. The Labrador's tail wagged. Shadow turned and walked back toward the fireplace, as if inviting them to follow. The Marine laughed quietly, a sound filled with disbelief and hope. Ethan opened the door wider. Warm air spilled into the snowy afternoon. The cabin felt alive now, not because of the money, not because of the land, because people were inside, people who understood, people who stayed. As snow began falling softly across Summit Ridge, Ethan watched the Marine and his dog step through the doorway. Then he followed them inside. The fire crackled. Coffee brewed, voices filled the room. And for the first time since inheriting a worthless $50 cabin, Ethan understood exactly what Samuel had been protecting all those years. Not property, not secrets, not wealth, people. And somehow, against all odds, the light had returned to the cabin once again. Winter settled deep across the Bighorn Mountains. Snow covered the forests in endless waves of white. The frozen lake beside Summit Ridge House gleamed beneath pale sunlight. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney. Warmth lived there now, not just from firewood, from people. Months passed. The transformation happened slowly. One repaired board at a time, one veteran at a time, one dog at a time. By early spring, the old cabin no longer looked abandoned. Fresh support beams reinforced the porch. New windows reflected the mountains. Solar panels rested discreetly along a southern slope. A second bunkhouse stood beyond the trees where volunteers had once stacked lumber. Nothing luxurious, nothing flashy. Just practical, strong, welcoming, exactly the way Samuel would have wanted it. Every morning began before sunrise. Ethan usually woke first. Old habits, some things never changed. At 5:30 a.m., He would step outside carrying a mug of coffee and watch the sky slowly brighten above the frozen ridges. The mountains changed color minute by minute, blue, silver, gold. Then daylight arrived, and another day began. Shadow almost always joined him. The German shepherd's limp had faded considerably. Age remained. Old injuries remained. But the pain no longer controlled him. The dog moved with a confidence Ethan hadn't seen in years. Peace had changed him. Healing had changed him. One morning, Ethan stood near the shoreline, watching mist drift across the thawing lake. Shadow sat beside him. Neither needed words. Behind them, laughter drifted from the cabin, a sound that still surprised Ethan sometimes. For years, silence had been his companion. Now life filled the air. Inside Summit Ridge House, breakfast had become an event. Frank, the retired Marine, insisted on cooking every morning. His old Labrador, Rosie, supervised from a blanket beside the stove. 3 other veterans now lived at the property, each carrying their own invisible wounds. Each arriving with stories they rarely shared immediately, but eventually they did. Because Summit Ridge House felt different. People didn't have to explain themselves there. Nobody demanded perfect answers. Nobody judged scars. Nobody asked impossible questions. They simply listened. Sometimes that was enough. One afternoon in March, Ethan stood inside the archive room beneath the cabin. The journals lined newly constructed shelves. Hundreds of stories, hundreds of lives. The true inheritance. Rebecca Grant had helped establish legal protections around every document. The archives would survive. Future generations would know what happened there. Would know who Samuel had been. Would know what veterans and military dogs accomplished together. Ethan carefully returned another journal to its place. Then he paused. A photograph had slipped loose from between the pages. Samuel stood beside Patriot, the military working dog from decades earlier. Both stared toward the camera, tired, proud, unbroken. Ethan smiled. The resemblance to him and Shadow felt impossible to ignore. Some missions never truly ended. They simply changed hands. Above him, footsteps crossed the floor. Voices followed. Life continued exactly as it should. By April, word about Summit Ridge House had spread far beyond Wyoming. Former handlers arrived from neighboring states. Veterinary organizations offered assistance. Retired military K-9 groups donated supplies. Local ranchers brought hay, lumber, and equipment. A church group from Sheridan delivered blankets. A high school woodshop class built dog beds, small acts, simple acts, meaningful acts. The community grew without anyone planning it. One evening, a retired Army medic named Sarah arrived with a senior Belgian Malinois named Echo. The dog had severe anxiety after retirement. He startled at every sound, paced constantly, rarely slept. Ethan recognized the signs immediately. So did Shadow. The old German shepherd approached carefully. No dominance. No pressure. Just calm confidence. Echo watched him nervously. Shadow simply lay down near the fireplace. Eventually, Echo joined him. 2 old warriors resting side by side. That night, Echo slept nearly 6 hours straight. His owner cried quietly when she realized it. Healing rarely looked dramatic. Most of the time, it looked exactly like that. Months rolled forward. The seasons changed. Snow melted. Wildflowers appeared across the mountain meadows. The frozen lake transformed into shimmering blue water. Birdsong replaced winter silence. Life returned everywhere. Summit Ridge House changed with it. The property now included walking trails, a small training field, a veterinary treatment room, a community garden. None of it felt forced. Each improvement grew naturally from need. One person helping another, then another, then another. Exactly as Samuel intended. Yet despite the growth, Ethan never allowed the place to lose its soul. The old stone fireplace remained untouched. The military carvings on the mantel remained visible. The original cabin stayed at the center of everything. History mattered, memory mattered, because healing required both. One summer evening, nearly a year after inheriting the cabin, Ethan sat alone on the porch. The sunset painted the mountains orange and gold. The lake reflected the colors like glass. Shadow rested at his feet. Older now, grayer around the muzzle, but peaceful, more peaceful than Ethan had ever seen him. The dog no longer woke growling, no longer paced through the night, no longer searched constantly for danger. The war had finally loosened its grip. For both of them, Ethan looked across the property. Several veterans sat around a fire pit near the shoreline. Others worked in the garden. A few dogs chased one another across the grass. The scene felt almost unreal. 1 year earlier, he had been sleeping inside a freezing pickup truck. 1 year earlier, he believed his life was finished. 1 year earlier, he had nothing except shadow. Now he understood how quickly life could change. Not because of money, not because of luck, because someone chose to care. Samuel cared. That choice changed everything. A truck appeared near sunset. Not unusual anymore. Vehicles arrived often. But something about this one felt different. The driver parked slowly, hesitantly, like someone uncertain whether they belonged. Ethan stood. Shadow rose beside him. The truck door opened. A man climbed out, mid-40s, thin, exhausted, haunted. Beside him emerged a young German shepherd. The dog immediately pressed close to the man's leg, nervous, fearful, alert. The resemblance struck Ethan instantly. Not physical, emotional. The same look he and Shadow carried when they first arrived, the same uncertainty, the same pain. The man approached carefully. His eyes moved across the property, the cabin, the veterans, the dogs, the mountains. Hope and fear battled across his face. Finally, he stopped near the porch. "This Summit Ridge house?" Ethan nodded. The man swallowed. "My counselor gave me the address." His voice cracked slightly. "I wasn't sure if it was real." Ethan smiled. "Neither was I." The man glanced down at the German shepherd. The dog trembled slightly. Shadow stepped forward, slowly, calmly. The younger dog stiffened, unsure, afraid. Shadow stopped a few feet away, then sat patient, steady, waiting. After a moment, the younger shepherd approached. One cautious step, then another. Finally, the dogs touched noses. A brief greeting, a quiet understanding. The younger dog relaxed almost immediately. Something in him seemed to recognize safety, recognition, acceptance, home. The man watched in disbelief. Ethan remembered that feeling, remembered it perfectly. He stepped aside and opened the cabin door. Warm light spilled across the porch. Voices drifted outward. Coffee, wood smoke, laughter, life. The man hesitated, then entered. The shepherd followed. Shadow walked beside them, guiding them toward the fireplace, toward the heart of the house, toward healing. Later that evening, Ethan stood near the window, watching darkness settle across the mountains. Inside, veterans talked quietly around the fire. Dogs slept at their feet. The younger shepherd now rested beside Shadow. The fear had faded from his eyes, at least for tonight. Outside, snow began falling again, gentle flakes drifting through the darkness. The same kind of snow that had greeted Ethan when he first arrived. The same mountains, the same cabin. Yet everything had changed. Ethan reached for Samuel's final journal resting on a nearby shelf. The pages were worn now, well-loved, frequently read. He opened to the final entry. The words remained as powerful as ever. The mission was never the land. The mission was never the money. The mission was keeping people alive long enough to remember they mattered. Ethan closed the journal. Across the room, Shadow slept peacefully beside the younger dog. No tension, no nightmares, no fear, just rest. Real rest. The kind both of them had searched for across countless miles and difficult years. Ethan looked around the room one last time. Veterans, dogs, family, community, second chances. Everything Samuel had hoped for. Everything worth protecting. Outside, snow continued falling across the Wyoming mountains. Inside, warm light glowed through the cabin windows. And for the first time in many years, neither Ethan nor Shadow feared tomorrow. Because the real inheritance had never been a $50 cabin. It had been the chance to become the safe place someone else desperately needed. And now that gift would continue. One veteran, one dog, one life at a time, forever. If you believe every veteran and every loyal dog deserves a place to be remembered, comment yes below. And if you've ever seen someone get a second chance when they needed it most, type 1. and share where you're watching from. Around here, we believe dignity, loyalty, and perseverance still matter. Subscribe and stay with us for more powerful stories of justice, resilience, and unforgettable bonds across the American heartland.